Well, welcome back, everybody, to the second session this morning, where we're going to focus on collaboration. And this is very much a practical workshop, which is going to be led by Kevin Murray, Irene Beautyman, Ian McPherson, and Lynn Gibbons. So I don't think there's any more from me to say at the moment. I'm going to hand straight over to you, Kevin, to get us into it.
Thanks very much, Charlie. And we're just going to get the presentation up. Good morning, everyone. Irene and I and my colleagues Ian and Lynn are looking forward to working with you on this. We hope you're having a good morning. This is an important theme, obviously, in Land Reuse Month. If we go into the next slide, I'll just explain a bit about how we're going to use this hour together. We're going to do a little bit of a briefing for you, and it's not a formal presentation, but it's just some thoughts and hooks from our experience, but it's really trying to tap into yours, because a lot of your knowledge that you've already had will be important, and what Irene and I will try and do is give you perhaps a way of reflecting on it. We're then going to run a two-part workshop around the roles of collaborators and looking at the benefits and opportunities from that, and also the blockages and some of the challenges in the second part. So they're two 15-minute sessions, and then from the groups that we've got, you will present your headlines and any key learning points that you've got, and we'll reflect on that at the end. So hopefully that's a good use of the time. We're going to try to appreciate the challenges and requirements of collaboration, because it isn't easy. Not everyone finds it a natural course of action if we're used to working within, let's say, one single organization. We're going to particularly think about the roles and constraints of sometimes individuals. Some of those can be legal or procedural or even political for some of you, but also the opportunities and the importance of what can be achieved through collaboration, and therefore working through some of the ways forward and thinking together about the benefits in terms of what can be achieved. As with previous sessions, please use the chat for any questions or comments. We can reflect on that at the end. But I'm going to start off, and basically Irene Beautyman, I should have said at the beginning, I'm from Kevin Murray Associates, and we do a lot of collaboration and consultation with communities around the country. Irene, as she will explain, is the wellbeing lead at both the Improvement Service and, if I've got this right, is it Public Health Scotland, Irene?
Yeah, that's correct.
So many of you will recognise both of us from different roles and different functions around the country. So we'll be bringing that back in and hopefully reconnecting some of you with your own experiences, because sometimes that's the best way to learn, is to look at what we already know slightly differently. Obvious starting point is who's collaborating with whom, and a lot of this is about what are they bringing to the table. And there is sometimes a set of key people you really need around the table, and it might be because of a statutory function or because of where they're from, or maybe what they can access in terms of resources. So trying to think, who do you need around the table in terms of the collaboration? Normally those people and groups and organizations have history, and sometimes we need to appreciate where they've come from. And sometimes some community groups have felt that they've maybe been marginalized or not heard in the past. Or sometimes there are developers or investors in a process or a program haven't always managed to deliver what they wanted to in the past. So trying to understand a little bit about where they've come from, but also what their current motivation is. What are we trying to address now? Is it carbon or health, or is it providing new homes or creating a new park? What is it we're trying to grapple with? The background of the organizations and the individuals can be really important in terms of the expectations and the aspirations that we set. So there are some images there from big groupings of people coming together and smaller groupings. Irene, anything from your experience, and I know you're doing a lot on the public health side now, anything you want to add about that, who's around the table?
Yeah, I think that the additional aspect is the variety of those that ought to be around the table can make things a bit messier as well, and communication can be a real struggle around that. Something that we're finding within our work right now is completely removing all jargon and all acronyms, because it's like whispering to somebody that's next to you while others can't understand what you're talking about, and we're just stopping it. And God, it's not easy. It's very difficult to stop yourself doing it, never mind then feeling that you're calling others out, and it feels a little bit rude, but it simply isn't fair. So that's why I quite like that idea, that it's like, would you let somebody sit around a table and whisper to the person next to them? You wouldn't really like it, so let's cut out on that as well.
So we're going to move on to the next slide. That's a really good point, the bit about the culture and the language that we all have in our different organizations. And just as an example, for some of the projects that you may or have been involved in, others, you can have councillors, there'll be landowners, there might be local services or functions, everything from shops to schools. There'll be community councillors and councillors. And in amongst that, there will also be maybe specialist advisors. On the council, you'll have regeneration or heritage planners, and there might also be others advising on green networks or cycling or other elements. These are just indicative and illustrative of some of the types. But that point Irene was making about language and what we use, they will all have their different acronyms or ways of working. And what we've got to do is try and make all of that accessible to everyone. Next slide, please. The other key thing is the purpose. Why are you coming together? Why might you want to collaborate? Are you trying to prepare a plan together? Is that a kind of strategy or a vision? Or maybe it's an action plan, or as in Scotland, we now have the new local place plans. And some people might even be coming together as a community group or other organization to put forward an application or a bid. Sometimes that's a funding bid. It could be another aspiration, could be remediation, and the hope might be to get development or some part development, greening, whatever it might be. Another reason might be just to bring the people together and begin an ongoing relationship that has some mutual benefit between the different parties. There are examples on the screen from obviously a plan being put together and capturing ideas visually and spatially, but the bottom right one is the Clay Pits nature reserve near the canal in Glasgow, and that's also the bridge in the middle that was put in as part of it. And all that came from a community visioning session and people collaborating over a number of years to bring that together. That bit about clarity of purpose, Irene, is that something you find easy in the work you're doing, or do people have to sift through that in various steps?
Yeah, I think we can think we're clear on a purpose, but others that we meet have got other objectives that they're coming to any communication with. And we need clarity of purpose of every session that we're having as well. What is it we're going to achieve here? We're not going to get it all done today and get into the details. So being clear about what each session is going to do, what the kind of time scales are that we're actually working around as well, so that everybody isn't, that there is particularly with communities, we'll think, let's find out what the community want. We seem to think there's one community with one voice, which there simply isn't. There'll be many parts of a community with differing visions for what they want from a place as well that have to be accommodated as well. So spending time at the beginning about being clear on what is it that we're here to do. Sometimes you know exactly what it has to be, and that isn't up for debate. For a particular reason, it isn't up for debate. Be clear about that up front. People should enter the room knowing what it is that they're coming in to discuss, rather than rocking up and then thinking, oh, this wasn't what I expected, and immediately feeling that they're on the back foot and they're unhappy. That upfront information before they even enter the room is really important, so that folks know that they're there and why they're taking part and just how much they're committing to as well.
Next slide, please. So that also by implication implies that people know what they're not doing as well. So there's a clarity of purpose. And when we've got that purpose, there are different ways in which people can collaborate. The one-off meetings, which could be part of a series, there can be events, they can be workshops, or the top images there, a charrette kind of collaborative event, site visits. The bottom one, I think, is Kincardine, as in Kincardine on Forth. There's a longer term process within which some of these events sit. So there could be different events in the series. So Irene's point about knowing the bigger goals, but also the very specific event goals. And people have different roles within that, but what's the role of the group coming together? Is it informal as a network? Is it part of maybe an emerging partnership? For some people, they even manage to convert themselves into trusts or SKIOs or more formal organizations. And the bottom one is the other kind of trust. The process of doing this together is about building trust about objectives and trying to achieve things collaboratively. So that trust element is key. Is that another thing that you're finding, Irene, in your work, that it takes a while to build up that trust?
Yeah, I think the trust building really does take time. And that can be even within an organization, within a council and different parts of a council. Building the trust to actually work together on a project takes time. And so that ask that we have coming down to us to do things quickly, at speed, the measurement that we have coming at us from Scottish Government about how quickly things are done, sits at odds with us being asked to collaborate, because it does take time to be able to say, right, if you're going there and I'm going there, maybe we could join that up and you go and do a little bit of what I was doing. But you're not going to immediately agree to that. That takes time, that takes relationships. But how do you build in the system change that means when you go off to another job or retire, that relationship continues? And I don't know that we think enough about, it's not just I've got a trusted relationship with that person in another place. How does that continue? How do I get a system here that supports that ongoing when I'm not around or that other person isn't as well?
Next slide, please. So timing and pacing is a big element of collaboration. It's not an on-off switch, but if we get it right, we can get quite substantial benefits. We can build up consensus between groups, organizations and individuals. We can sometimes unlock problems or what were seen as problems in the past, turn them maybe into opportunities. We can generate new kinds of solutions or designs or even approaches to funding, and that might be co-funding. We can bring together action plans and work towards delivery. The top one on the image there is from the Prestwick work, where different themes, some of which were council-led, some local businesses, but the others were community groups and organizations, and they could all fit together under different themes. In terms of what success looks like, we put in the kind of gold standard product of a derelict and vacant, what was effectively a village, New Lanark, that was transformed over many, many years, literally decades of collaboration between different organizations and funding and delivery. And we know you're not all dealing with that scale of challenge, but it's just saying that what can be achieved over time with the right kind of positive collaboration. I know some of your work, particularly on the public health side, is still in the early days, Irene, but are you seeing any seeds of positivity coming through from people being able to work together?
Yes, I mean, there are a lot of challenges to getting folks to work together, and you mentioned them already, Kevin. Simply things like procedures and the ability to get access to each other's buildings, each other's information. We're having challenges around that already. But I think what we're doing is there's so many of us out there doing these types of collaboration, and I'm not sure we're sharing an awful lot around those things that we're hitting along the way, the process of collaboration. I think it's important that we reflect on what we've had as a challenge and let others know how we've dealt with that, so that we're not all going over and over the same issues and the same problems. And that when it's great to say build consensus, but we know we can't always achieve that. But we can have a number of different aims from different parts, but we're coming together and able to deliver on one part together, and then we may still have to go off and deliver on our own aims and ambitions of our own organisations in other areas. But we can pull together, and for myself with the Shaping Places for Wellbeing, it's what is that contribution of a place to dealing with inequality, to dealing with child poverty. That doesn't mean the organisations that we work with aren't also off doing other parts of work in order to address a whole system approach, but we can link up together. So it's being able to kind of slightly segment it off and work together on one element rather than a full consensus across that kind of collaborative approach.
Next slide, please. So the very hosting of something like this by the Scottish Land Commission is useful in itself to address that sharing point that you make, Irene. And you've already begun to reference some of the realities that we can confront in that, either as risks or just constraints. Sometimes it's the legal scope of an organization, what it's allowed to do, what it's set up to do, whether it's a public agency in terms of statutory functions, or sometimes it's a SKIO or some other community organization. Also, as we work through collaboration, people's expectations can shift. And sometimes that can be up or down depending on how progress is being made. The obvious one that I think you referenced is changing personnel, people retiring, moving on or out of an area or whatever. And sometimes you can set up a partnership or a collaborative body, and everybody's moved within 5 years or so, and everyone's different, and you've changed from the original thrust and emphasis and sense of ownership. So that final one around maintaining trust and credibility and continuing momentum is a very big issue. The one in the bottom one is the grouping in Concard, and that I was involved in working with, and the young people inputted in. What you want to see is that they can see their ideas and their projects fulfilled over time. But if everybody changes and the goals and the projects change, that connection can be lost. So is that fair? Are there any other risks? I know we don't want to focus too much on the challenges and constraints today, but anything else, Irene, that jumps out that you think we should be saying about the realities we can confront?
Yeah, so something that I'm a big proponent of in order to get better and more effective collaboration is secondments, coming from one organisation and being seconded into another. The example for ourselves is, you're working in public health and health improvement, but you're seconded into a council that is looking at health impact assessments, that's looking at the impact of its major development proposals and thinking that through. But secondments do come with their challenges around that we've got to be future-proofing, so that when that secondment comes to an end, those relationships don't stop, and the things that we've essentially committed to, as you're referring to there, Kevin, don't come to a halt. And I think any collaboration that we're in, we should have that in our heads. How do we future-proof this? How do we continue this on when we stop? And if we're not, then we're almost back to the kind of regeneration interventions that we used to do in the 80s. Go in, lots of money, make a change, walk away, and things don't continue on. We have to be future-proofing our collaborations.
Thanks, Irene. So that future-proofing point is a really good way to lead us into the workshop. We're going to do in two parts. So all of you on this session in the workshop have this challenge. You're in a situation where you have to deal across a number of different players and organizations. Initially, you're starting up, it's envisaged over a year, but it's probably going to take 2 to 3 years. And you're trying to bring a problem, vacant and derelict site back into use. There's an image there of a possibility, but it's for you to decide whether it's urban or rural or small town, whatever you think. But if you can envisage that kind of site in the problem. We've got 4 roles for you to consider. As we showed earlier, there could be many, many more. But for the purpose of the workshop, we want you to think about the community-based environmental campaign group who've been campaigning on this site for a long time. The regeneration planner in the council, who has come from another role, so they're quite new to this role, but maybe quite keen and enthusiastic to make something happen. The site landowner, who has had the site, but it's had to change its role and its function. It's fallen out of use during the last 20 years. And finally, that there are advisors, particularly with experience in green networks, but also in transport and cleaning up sites. They've got expertise, and also they've got knowledge about how to access funding. So those 4, and all of you might have come across at least some of those in your careers. So we'd like you to draw upon that. The first part, as you go into groups in a moment, just going to come up on the screen. The first 2 things in the next 14, 15 minutes we'd like you to look at is this. Discuss the scope and motivation of each of those 4 roles. So what are people looking to get out of it in terms of their role? And then before you report back, if you spend the last few minutes, maybe the last 5, 6, 7 minutes, can you identify 2 or 3 collaborative goals that grouping or collaboration could have, either short or medium term, your ideas, but just some goals that they share together. And then we'll come back and we'll move into the second part in about 14 minutes. Welcome back. This is just to guide you into the second part. but we are looking, if you could make sure there is someone from your group can just give us the headline points from your the 4 tasks after this part. So part 2 is this: discuss the benefits of taking a collaborative approach. You know, what's in it for everyone, for the place itself in terms of where the site is located. It's not just the site, it's its context, but also for the organizations, people, community who may be involved, the participants and partners. And if you've got time from discussing that, are there any blockages that you can see? And are there ways that the collaboration can overcome those, or the approach can help mitigate them? So any thoughts on 4? But if you focus on the benefits first, from the collaborative approach for the respective parties in the place. We're going to move you back into groups now, and then the feedback at the end, if you can restrict it to 2 to 3 minutes max, that will keep us to time. Thanks very much. Okay, welcome back to the plenary. We hope you had really good discussions. That the ones that I was able to listen into, I thought were excellent because of the depth of knowledge that a lot of the participants had. I'm going to go first to group 1, which I think was the one Lynn was in. We're really looking for just a minute or 2 of what were some of the headline points, not all the details, Lynn, because obviously we can write that up later, but any key things emerging from that first group in across both the sessions.
One kind of emerging theme was kind of clarity from the outset, transparency, agreeing parameters, so that you know, somewhere down the line people weren't. Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Right. Kind of clarity from the outset, agreeing parameters, agreeing joint ambitions, transparency. Those kind of words were fairly repeated throughout the discussion. In terms of some of the blockages, I think if they were identified at the outset, then and kind of undertaken at the outset, understood at the outset, then they may not have the kind of impact of blocking. So language use, the transparency thing, communication wider than language, I suppose, recognizing that people are going to come at this from very different perspectives. Some might be hostile, some might be worried, and that impacts on how people feel at the outset, and kind of recognizing that. Recognizing as well that the people who sit around the table kind of, they need not to be risk averse. They need to be empowered to be not risk averse. And people need to understand the range of different constituencies that are represented, and that they impact on whether or not an individual has that ability to be empowered. I think overall there was a huge recognition of the benefit of collaborative working when it is approached positively. Huge benefits in terms of better outcomes, in terms of the kind of energy and vitality of what comes across, and benefits to individual participants as well. For example, in terms of landowners who may have corporate social responsibility, being part of something like this could tick a lot of boxes for them.
Thanks, Lynn. That's really good. That's some excellent discussion and feedback from group 1. I'm going to go to group 2. Ian or anyone else who's been nominated from group 2. Anything you want to add to that list that Lynn's provided from group 1?
Yes, lots of overlap from our group as well. We spoke about the collaborative working, bringing more expertise and different perspectives, and building trust that can then preempt and diffuse conflicts before they happen. Building that sort of momentum to overcome apathy and increase the sort of transparency of working. Building building in more resilience. That's not so it's not just depending on one or two individuals, and being more directly representative of the wider community, so that there's integrity in that process of trying to represent what the breadth of what people feel.
That's excellent. Thanks very much, Group 2. Well done in your discussions. Irene, any reflections on that? Is that what you thought that they'd come up with within a mere half an hour's discussion, or any big deal responses that you hadn't been expecting in there?
No, reflections are that walking in others' shoes, basically, the process that we've just gone through gives you more of an insight to how collaborative working can actually change what your objective originally was for something, because you hear what others are looking for. I did hear reflections about how do you decide what a community wants, and I completely agree with that. I think we need to be very clear on who in an area is actually experiencing real inequalities. Are we making sure we're talking to them and seeking them out rather than listening to those who shout the loudest? Something I'd expected to come through was about the reasons for collaborations, to make sure we're identifying any unintended consequences of what we're doing, especially if they're going to be negative, and doing something about that. And then just finally, it was in the chat earlier about, as a blockage, is the skills to do that collaboration, to lead it and to take part in it, and to keep it being a productive and positive activity as well. That had come out right at the very beginning of the session, so I'm going to put that in the chat, and I think that is really important also. Thanks.
Thanks, Irene. And now, just as I effectively hand back to Charlie as chair, just to recap, I think you've done a fantastic job, really good discussions. You picked up on the importance of shared knowledge and evidence, of shared parameters and expectations, but also the importance of the potential that shared capacity can come out of that collaboration. And a couple that came out for me towards the end were the importance of trust and confidence building, and also empowerment, which Lynn referred to, which can help in terms of delivery and mutual delivery from the partners in the collaboration. So well done, everyone. Really fantastic session. Thanks for your participation today. I'm going to hand back to Charlie.
Thank you very much, Kevin, and the rest of the team there, and brilliant timekeeping as well, if I may say so. A lot of ground covered in a relatively short period of time, so that's fantastic.